My last concert was in March in Tokyo. Then after I came home, it was like a domino effect. Everything's falling. It almost brought me back to student days, where I wasn't giving that many concerts, but every concert was very important. I think the ones that really will survive through this crisis are the ones who have not stopped learning, have not stopped discovering. Yeah, it was quite devastating. In fact, when I stopped traveling in April, it was okay. Believe it or not, April, I just felt it was like a holiday, and I was quite optimistic. I thought by autumn, everything would be back to normal. So in April, I was okay. By May and June, it was really, really difficult because I'm so used to traveling and always. We have these deadlines with concertizing every week, every 3-4 days sometimes, and every 2 weeks. There's something to go for, something to strive for, to something to work towards to. And suddenly there was nothing. But it was I think by July it was I started to rediscover myself in the way that I never had the opportunity before. There were repertoires that I never had the time to learn, like the Schnittke Sonata, for example. I really loved the piece, and every time I hear it, I wanted to do it, but never had the opportunity because I was so limited by my own concertizing deadlines. So it was a perfect opportunity to learn that piece. It was a perfect opportunity to revisit some of the old repertoire that I never, at least for the last couple of seasons, never had the opportunity. For example, Bach suites. So I relearned a lot of the Bach suites and changed some of the bowings and fingerings even. So things like that, I think it changes the way we learn things or experience how to learn even when you don't have a concert coming Saturday. And you realize actually how much you love the instrument, how much you love music. But if you were always on the road, it takes away that love or the passion sometimes, because it becomes just another day in office. Of course, you're working with different orchestra, different conductors and different pieces, and you still love it and all that. But I think one demonstrates even more passion when there's not a deadline in front of you, and still try to have the discipline and diligent to pursue. I did some digital online concerts, which also I've learned a lot because when you're sitting in the recording studio, when you have a microphone in front of you, you play, if you're recording an album or CD, you play in a certain way. You want to be a little bit more polished in sound because the microphone is so close to you. And in a concert, there's not any concert hall. It doesn't matter how small that the audience's head is only half a meter in front of you. Your first front row audience is always going to be at least 10 meters away from you. So, or even let's say a very small recital, still I would say probably 3-4 meters away from you. So do a digital concert. It was very interesting to find that fine balance between still, because they're cameras, so you still have to treat it as a concert, but at the same time, try to achieve a certain refinement in your sound production. So that was also a learning curve for me. Again, probably would have never had the opportunity if there's no COVID. So I'm trying to look on the bright side of this whole thing and try to encourage my students also to carry on. I've always felt a close connection with the country. When I was 6, I think, my parents they were visiting professors in Finland, and lived in China back then, and they brought back so many things and photos and telling us stories about Finland. So even before I set my foot on this fantastic country, I had an impression of Finland. Of course, we all know how cold in wintertime Finland is, but the fire and the passion in the people, in their heart, it's probably it's a balance to the external challenges we face in Finland. And I live in Singapore now, and the similar population, I think, to Finland. And I always tell people what's amazing about Finland is, in Finland we have, I think if I'm correct, 18 professional orchestras in Finland. And that's an extraordinary number for a relatively small country, and even perhaps quite a small population by world standard. But to have that many orchestras and all have very fulfilling and very professional and serious and fantastic seasons, musical seasons that I mean, is extraordinary. And I do feel that Finland is a very, very musical and cultured city and a country. And Helsinki, and I was told that the concerts had to start quite early in Helsinki because apparently because it's so cold in the winter that if people gets home first after work, they never come out again. So that was a very amusing and funny little story. But actually, I can tell from the audience I was playing to, a majority of them did just actually finish work, and going to concerts, listening to music became part of their life, became part of their day before they go back home. And for me, that's very nice, and that's ultimately, classical music and concert going is part of that journey. That's a lifestyle choice. I think it's wonderful to see that in Helsinki and in Finland. Working with the Radio Symphony, of course, it was a great privilege. But in fact, before the Rococo, I had an opportunity playing with this wonderful orchestra, also with the chief conductor, then Hanno Lintu, with Chen Qigang's cello concerto. Very recently, I had the opportunity to work with Maestro Ashkenazi and on the Rococo variations. And one thing he said to me is, Li Wei, you don't have to prove yourself. And when I was younger, we all wanted to, you want to show the world how wonderful or how fantastic one can play the cello, and even your understanding of the piece, you want the world to see, and you want the audience to feel. But actually, Rococo is about, I think, generosity. All the fortes, all the big gestures, you don't have to force it. And also, it's a piece, I think, because it's a theme and variations. The characteristics of these variations needs to come out quite distinctively. Because there is the Rococo side and there's the Tchaikovsky side. And I think to find that balance between the two, I think very different cultural experiences or cultural aspects is to find a balance is the essence of playing this piece. And perhaps, of course, this is for me right now, the current few seasons, I tend to play Rococo theme relatively simple, relatively Rococo. And as you progress, of course, we're talking about the Fitzhagen edition now, we're not talking about the original. As you progress, you perhaps could have a little bit more Tchaikovsky. Variation 6, variation 7, that's very Tchaikovsky, I think. The cadenza. But, your variation 1, your variation 2 could still be done in a very elegant Rococo style. So finding that progression inside where and when and how do you merge, if you like, to the Tchaikovsky aspects. Is a fine art, and it changes, and it's also depending on the hall, depending on the orchestra, the conductor you work with. And luckily with Hannu, Hannu Lintu is a cellist, and is a very good cellist, so he knew the piece probably better than I did. So it's always wonderful to work with string players as conductors, because they know the challenges. They appreciate the breathing points, but even more so if the conductor is a cellist, then it couldn't be better. So it was a wonderful experience. Yeah. Competition is a knife with two edges, I think. Often people say, if you don't have to do competitions, don't do it. But for most of us, it's a part of our musical training and part of our journey. And the Paulo competition, it's probably one of the most challenging and most high-class cello competitions in the world. Especially, I think, with Maestro Arthur Noras' decision on choosing a specific repertoire. I've never seen a competition where you probably have to do 3 concertos. A Haydn concerto and a core romantic concerto like Schumann or Rococo, and plus a modern concerto. I think that's in itself, it's very, very challenging for the competitors. What's also very attractive to this competition is for the juries is the first round, the competitors could bring their own repertoire for the 45 minutes. It's a free choice. That really showcased many of the competitors' abilities, both in their cello playing and, of course, their interpretation of certain pieces. And a lot of those pieces were core repertoire, and it was really nice to see. But on top of that, it was also an opportunity for the organizer or the promoters or the juries to see how a competitor or a young cellist program their own recital program. That's part of the game. To know, if one has to do a Carnegie Hall recital, what repertoire you bring to the audience, that it's showcasing your ability. Also at the same time, bring an artistic integrity, and of course, having only selected, if I remember correctly, 35 or 40 out of 80 or 90 initial applications. The 35 players were there all super. They were all very, very good. I mean, the level was extremely high. And, for juries, we were, always looking for that a bit more X factor. Everybody could play. I mean, there was not one person I thought it was, finding it difficult to be on stage. In fact, majority of them, I will be more than happy to buy a ticket to listen to the recital. But not everybody all had this, I think, this stage presence as well as this artistic integrity. I mean, I think it's a very fine line, and I'm not saying that people who didn't get through the first round didn't have it in their blood. It was just for that moment. And that's what's so difficult about competitions nowadays even. But we had a very good final. We had wonderful winner, Brennan. And I've he's done very well over the years, and even before the Paulo competition, I think he did very well in many other competitions. So it was not an accident he got to the final and won the competition. He had a lot to offer, both artistically and of course technically. He did Prokofiev, and it's a very difficult piece, but never once we felt he was in difficulty. Never once we felt he was not on top of the piece. So so it was a nice experience, and for me, because I was the youngest jury, and it was not long ago. I mean, when I say not long ago, of course it's many years ago when I was still doing competitions, and to appreciate the pressure and the challenges all of them faced, and I was so glad I was on this side of the fence. But at the same time, I really thought all of them were very, very high class cellists. Tchaikovsky competition was in 1998. I did it and thinking that if I could get through to the semi-final, I'd be quite happy already. But I got to the final, so in a way, I didn't feel that much pressure anymore. Internally, I gave myself a goal of, I was 23, so I thought if 23, 27, if we really push it, 31 still possible. So I still had another another two, 3 chances. So I thought, look, I'm in the final, enjoy myself. Of course, I'm not saying that enjoy myself, I didn't feel nervous. Of course, it doesn't matter how you tell yourself to calm down. Having worked this hard over the years, it was always going to be tough. I feel quite lucky to have actually worked on this concerto for many years. I learned it when I was 13, very early. But while I was in Australia between 13 and 19, I had the opportunity to play this with orchestra many times, this piece. Partly because, being only 18 minutes, this is quite a easy to program repertoire in a concert. And also, I won quite a few competitions in Australia, so part of the prize was to work with the Sydney Symphony or Melbourne Symphony, or the other orchestra, Adelaide, Queensland. So Rococo's always, every season, I had the opportunity to play it. And I even recorded the concerto, the Rococo variations when I was 17, 18 with the Melbourne Symphony. So it's a piece I lived for a long time. So in that way, I felt quite lucky. I did have a lot of experience before even I stepped on stage at the final of the Tchaikovsky competition. One will always try to find opportunities to experience these pieces and to play them, to perform them before you go to the final stage of a competition. You do all your trials and tests and challenging moves and 3 somersaults in the air type of playing in the concerts before. If you're looking at variation 1, variation 2, and especially variation 7, these very quite technical, quite jumpy variations, to know how an orchestra will react, and sometimes how much later, sometimes to react to that. It's quite important to really get used to that momentum or get used to that timing. Working with orchestra on this piece was very beneficial for me. So yes, so did quite well. Did I do it very differently? Probably not. By doing not very differently, that's probably my safe choice. I think, yes, I told myself, look, it's the final already. I've already fulfilled much more than I expected. But nevertheless, I wanted to do a good job. And I know how much, I know what my capacity was. I didn't want to overstretch anything that it's unreasonable. And having had this piece for so many years already, it kind of already found its, or at least for 1998, gosh, that's so many years ago. Back then, I think it already found its position in my capacity, in my way of playing. It's in a very comfortable position. I was not pushing it too hard to the left or right or up or down, but still, I know I've had so many concerts on it. By not pushing it, I know there was a certain standard, a certain way of playing that it's already been marinated for a long time. And Dvorak Concerto, I also had many opportunities. I recorded an CD before even I went to the competition. So things like that helped. Naumburg competition in New York, I did the Bach Concerto for the final. Samuel Barber, only because I thought, I'm in America, I might as well do something that's American. It's a very difficult piece, but it's a beautiful, beautiful piece, and actually I really like that piece. I don't think competition should be something that you're always playing your old repertoire. I think that actually brings too much pressure onto the performer, onto the competitor. I mean, can you imagine if somebody had to prepare a set repertoire for a competition for, let's say, 5 years or 4 years, and then you bring that repertoire to the competition, and if you don't do well, I think it almost feels like you wasted 4 years, you know. So I think, you know, part of the game is to time your competitions quite well. So you look at the schedule, you look at the timing, you know, the timing of when it happens, and then you actually program your learning towards those competitions. Perhaps sometimes with new repertoires, so you actually get to learn something. So competition becomes landmarks in the whole journey, throughout the whole journey of your learning, rather than say, I'm doing for the competition, because then I think your learning process, your learning adventure, journey will be interrupted by all these competitions, and that's not helpful. For many of us who, especially also coming from, you know, Australia or Asia, you go to Germany, you go to England, you go to America, it's a new country, and you want your voice to be heard. You want to open the window, at least, you know, stick your head out and say hello to everybody, and so people recognize you. So competition is it's a perfect opportunity for a lot of young artists. And so everybody has that chance, you know, it's like, you know, Australian Open, you know, as long as you can play well, you'll be in the final. So I think it's a great opportunity for people to showcase. But it's not, I don't think, it's not the only way for learning. You can treat it as a very challenging hurdles, if you like, in your learning. And also, at the same time, I think the benefit of competition is it's a little bit like CelloFest without the festival word. You know, you get to hear so many different versions of a certain repertoire. I mean, Paulo is a little bit different because everybody brought their own repertoire. But, you know, majority of the competitions, there is a set repertoire, or at least you get to choose pieces from a set repertoire. And then you're bound to hear different versions of the same piece. And that's a great learning opportunity. You know, it's you know, often these big competitions, people go there who end up there are already at a very good level. And often they are all professionals by then. And to hear their way of interpreting certain pieces, their way of telling the same story. You know, we know the journey, we know the storyline already, but how you tell the story, where you bring the light in, where, you know, the change of the consonant, the change of the weight of how you're saying it, things like that are all very different from different parts of the world, different school of teaching, and different influences over the years. So I think for me, going to competitions, it was a great way of you know, learning, sharing, and also motivating myself. So yeah, it was a long journey. I did many competitions, and I enjoyed most of them. I did enjoy them. Yeah. It's a little bit like playing golf. If the center of the ball is here, I think you have to think about swing your racket, swing your club way past the ball. Okay, this is not the end game. You actually have to think your swing has to follow through. It's a little bit like competitions. Competitions, actually the main goal for competitions, as I say, it's like opening a window so that if you win a competition, or if you do very well in a competition, you actually get you have an opportunity to be heard. Every competition, if you're in a prize winners range, you actually get up, you know, in a contract, you get opportunity to work with orchestras and sometimes with, you know, recording contracts. So these actually are the main important things. So if one recognizes that as the main important things, then your learning process or your attitude towards competition should always be about, strive for better things rather than competition is the end game. So if you have that mentality, as I said, your preparation for competition should not always be about try to win. It's about actually to showcase your abilities. In the old days, when I was doing competitions, like if you win a competition, you probably get mentioned in the Strat magazine 2 months later. But now immediately your Instagram, your Facebook, and everything, you be heard instantly. So that's to everybody's benefit, I think, for the young competitors. Yes, I recognize it's a little bit harder. I think everything's harder. I mean, everybody plays better now because, we are condensing the learning process much more quickly. When I was young, if I need to work out some fingerings and bowings, I had a cassette tape. I put the earphone on. I could actually work out fingerings and bowings from some certain, recordings. But I had to actually rewind forward, to find out bowings and fingerings. But nowadays, you go on YouTube, you get 30 different editions, and then you instantly have. So the initial, let's say from 0 to 10, that's the whole learning process of Rococo variations. From 0 to 5 is very quick. Nowadays, provided you work, provided you practice, it's very quick. And so ultimately, I think the playing, the technical side of cello playing is generally very good these days. So next step is what's more important. What's the next bit? I mean, in the old days, probably to play the Prokofiev Symphony Concertante, spotless is probably already 70% there. But now it's probably only 30%. So what's next? So it's about personalities. It's about your individual storytelling ability. To showcase that, I think, is probably the most important thing. Rather than to say, look, competition, I want to be safe. Because to be safe, in some ways, will get you to a certain level quite quickly in a certain competition. But now with all the cameras on you, being safe, when I say safe, really just kind of be accurate, and probably having accuracy being your focal point of your playing. And that is not helpful. And that actually closes doors because you are in a competition already. Nowadays, if you're in a competition, you're already on the professional podium as a professional concert artist. Whereas in the old days, competition, it's a two-step process. You win a competition, open the window, you do the concert. But now, it's actually simultaneously done. So I think always look at opportunities, look at the performing side or performing opportunities after the competition as your main focus, as the main career. Then I think you will treat the competition like a performance. I think ultimately that's the most important thing. Not to say you just throw the whole kitchen sink into it, but to be treating the competition as just as a platform for you to do a concert, to do a good concert, to do a very well prepared concert. Straight after 1999, I had a very big year concertizing, and 2000 was a little bit calmer, obviously, naturally. And I was complaining to my teacher. I said, look, my next month, I only have 3 concerts. What's going to happen? He said, Li Wei, this is a perfect opportunity for you to learn new pieces and, to recharge yourself musically. I don't mean just lying around sleeping, but actually to recharge yourself musically, to accumulate enough energy, to accumulate enough quality in your playing, in your artistic journey. And I thought that was a very good advice for me, because, everything you do, what you input into learning, to playing, to practicing, ultimately, you will get the reward. You will be rewarded. And to accumulate, it's like in archery. If you just pull back as far as you can, and the arrow is going to go further. But often, when we're doing a lot of concert, it just becomes yes, I'm probably quite well trained to do that, but it just becomes a continuous schedule, rather than actually really try to accumulate enough quality. And then when you let go with the arrow, it's going to really fly. I suppose it was a portrait of my last year. And going back to the beginning of the whole crisis, April, May, June, it was pretty dark. Put it very simply, quite a sad opening of this last year. I think the Fifth Suite does justice to that. A reason I did 145, but in the concert I actually did the reverse order. I did 541. And, it was actually, the reason I did these 3 suites in one night, first of all, because in Singapore, we could only have a little over an hour concert, and they could not allow admissions. So considering, all the people are going to have to be sitting there, not leaving their seats and for toilet breaks and anything. So I thought I should not do too long. So no break, 541. So again, going back to the beginning of the whole crisis, April, May, June, it was pretty dark. To have that, the darkness, and also just felt that the heaviness, I think the Fifth Suite does justice to that. And I think the Fifth Suite demonstrates that darkness and that struggle fairly well. But then after that, the Fourth Suite, for me, it's almost like adjusting to the new norm. I mean, after the C minor, coming out to an E flat major, for me, that was a natural progression. But at the same time, as all cellists know, the E flat major is not an easy piece. The stretching, the jumping, the spacious feeling one should achieve with such busy notation often, in the case of the courant, but still have the freedom, have the space. I suppose that's almost like the new norm. We have to live on. We have to find our own rhythm in this new normal way of living worldwide. To still carry on, to still find time to practice, to work, to live normally with restrictions and with limitations. And for me, the Four Suites was very much like that. And of course, as you can probably guess, the first suite is about hope and originally it's about birth, but I think it's about rebirth. And I'm hopeful that the first suite demonstrates our common belief that ultimately this crisis will be over, and the first suite is something that we look forward to. For many cello students, or even cello music lover, or even cellists coming to my concert, having struggled through this. I mean, on my program, I didn't say. I actually wrote first suite, 14th suite, fifth suite. But I'm sure when they sat down and they heard da 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 da, and for many cello students, they probably never played the fifth suite. When I say young cello students, they were so looking forward to hear the solo, but they only heard it after 1 hour. After an hour of music that's glorious as it was, probably, but not so familiar to many of the young cellists. But then after an hour to hear the G major, that was quite special, I think, for them. And that, I think that's the feeling all of us should have, for 2021 and perhaps even 2022, to have that feeling of, to still welcoming back what we are used to, what we are familiar with, and to have hope that it will come back. First of all, I tell my students there's hardly any right and wrong in Bach, especially when I'm teaching my university students. If you listen to 10 different artists playing Bach, there are 10 different versions. And it's very confusing often for students to listen to all these different editions. And if you want to try to only to copy or imitate one edition, that's not helpful. I think it's very important to listen to a lot of different editions and to find out, I mean, you hear interpretations, you hear different corners and different timings, but rather than just hearing the timing and corners, work out why that person did it. Work out the reason. Probably there is a step one followed by a step two. But step one was so subtle that you didn't hear it. But you only heard the importance of the step two. But if you retrack, if you go back and to discover what step one was, and then suddenly your step two, which would be much more logical and meaningful. Let's face it, for every cellist playing Bach on stage, one of the most nerve-wracking thing is memorizing. It's for violinists playing the partitas or the Goldberg variations for pianists and for Bach suites for cellists, it's the same. Memorizing is very difficult. I strongly advise people when they're learning the piece to always try to work out patterns. There are very interesting and intriguing compositional patterns. Sometimes they're compositional, sometimes it's actually practical cello playing patterns. There are, bowing patterns, there are fingering patterns, and there are, of course, as I say, compositional patterns. So when you're learning these pieces, learning these dances, you should always, even from day one, work out these patterns from day one, because these patterns are the things that are going to help you to memorize. These are the things. If you think Bach in a linear fashion, you're gonna have such a tough time memorizing, because it's gonna cause you could have exactly same pattern of 3 notes that will bring you to a different path, and then you get yourself into trouble. But if you see 2 bars, 2 bars, 2 bars, or 4 bars, 4 bars, 4 bars. And if you have the pedal notes going down from B flat to A flat to G, and if you're memorizing page 1, 4th line, there is that pattern for 4 bars, even while you're learning it, not only your interpretation will be logical and there is meaning to it, but also your future performing, memorizing, performing it will be much easier to deal with. Not so much. Intonation, I think I think there's a certain standard in Bach playing. Of course, if you play on the Baroque cello or something that goes out of tune easier, then I think your listening standard has to adjust to. But on the modern cello, the intonation stays so it doesn't wobble so much. Then we have to. I think we have to have a standard. Of course, because we don't do so much vibrato, our intonation is exposed a little bit more. But I believe that if one's intonation is reasonably good, that the Bach should survive its own course. It really depending on the movement. It's difficult for me to say a certain suite. Of course, if I have to say one suite, I would say probably the 6th suite too. It's a resurrection. I mean, I like D major. I mean, I like Haydn D major too. So, but I think individually the movements, like da da di da di da di da 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 da. For me, it's beautiful. Fourth suite, the saraband. For me, it's actually the most beautiful saraband. But of course, everybody's different. The D major, I think the D major prelude is very special. I think the D major prelude has the grandioso of it. the space that it creates, the vast emotional journey it brings us through. I think that's probably my favorite prelude. So it really depending on which movement, and it depending on which season. And I sometimes like this, sometimes I like that. I always hate the piece that I haven't practiced very much. So I always like the piece I practice a lot. So usually that's the case. Every student need different things. As a good teacher, I think one should always recognize what the student needs. If somebody is very shy, somebody is very subtle, you need to open them up. I need to be almost like a clown jumping around in the house, in the room, just to inspire him or her. But if somebody who is very, very out there already, and then you probably need to tame them a little bit. So things like that is different. I suppose, ultimately my teaching, very general teaching philosophy is, there are a few things I think one has to be very, very careful. One is to be able to play the instrument well. I think we need to be able to talk the talk and walk the walk. I think be able to play the instrument well is very important. Second thing, I think while you appreciate and to recognize and to respect everything on paper, you always need to find your own voice. COVID. I've been watching some Netflix, and I've been watching The Crown, and then I realized something. Everything in The Crown storyline, we all know the ending. We know the end game. In fact, everything, they talked about 20, 30, 40 years ago. We know the end game already. It's happening right now. But why is this so well done? It's because the way they tell the story. The same story can be told so many different ways. If you tell well, the same story, people, I don't believe people come to hear the Dvorak concerto, majority of them in the concert was hearing it for the first time. I think at this level, in Europe or even in parts of Asia, in Tokyo, Seoul, Shanghai, Beijing, Taipei, the majority of people has heard Dvorak concerto, but they want to hear your way of interpreting this masterpiece. So while you're respecting everything Dvorak wrote, and we're like a detective story, we try to find all the evidence, but at the same time, you have to tell your story. You have to shine your shade of color onto this object. So that's the second thing. I think the third thing is to acknowledge technology. We are living in the 21st century where technology is here to help us. Like what I said about learning pieces, you can hear 20, 30, 40 different editions of the same piece so quickly after a few clicks. And why not use that? It's it's quite a holistic approach. I think these days, I think to be a good musician, I think you have to be trained, and you have to train yourself to be quite multitask. Have the ability to do multitasking, and also have a very holistic training background. Certain things I try not to touch when I'm doing Zoom. One is sound quality. Like sound projection is useless. I mean, have a microphone that's 20 centimeters closer. You are the loudest, best projecting cellist in the world. To have it 20 centimeters further away from you, suddenly you sound like you're playing on the gut strings. So sound projection and sound quality, I try not to touch. We can deal easily with the timing, direction, interpretation even, and adjustments to phrasings, and so that's no problem. Tempo is absolutely no problem. But sound quality, I think it's one thing, because I suffer from that. I had a student in Sydney a few years ago who I thought had a big sound. But of course, the room he was playing in was very boomy. and the microphone was relatively close. So when I saw him in person, it was not exactly what I expected. So things like that. I think we all have to recognize the limitations or advantages also on the other side of Zoom and online teaching. So yeah, I think if both sides recognize that, so even for students, try not to bring a piece that requires a lot of adjustment in sound quality. Let's say, don't bring a French piece like Debussy that needs so much refinement in the same. Shostakovich's first movement probably will work pretty well on Zoom. Concerto. Repetition and find out the where the downbeats are, things like that. It's where the accents are, the mood. All these things are fine on Zoom. Everybody's very different, but I always start with the scales. Even if I have 20 minutes in a hotel, I try to just make sure my physical playing level with me and my hands and cello is in a very good contact. And, I always believe that sometimes if it's like an athlete, if you were doing high jump, sometimes it's useless just to be doing the high jump. It's just go to the gym. You should go to the gym, make sure your physical being is in a very peak condition, then a lot of things will actually work by themselves. So I actually just do scales. I do very slow scales and with vibrato. So you imagine it's like the most beautiful piece you're playing in forte. Very, very smooth, especially during the bow change. That's one thing. I also try to have vibratos that is comfortable, so you can warm up and also practicing this connection between both hands with the strings and with the bow. Second thing I do in terms of discovering one's ability in expressing certain sound is again using scales. And I try to do, let's say, a little faster bow, but try to find a different character for every note. So for example, if I was doing D major again, let's say from A string, let's say very dolce and a little bit more confident and a little bit confused. Cold. Very hot. It doesn't have to be a set thing, but it can be random. But I think because it's very slow, you can almost decide millisecond or half a second before you change your bow. And then by doing that, I feel that, playing something like the Elgar Concerto third movement, one really benefits from that. Because often you're not changing the note, but the harmony changes because your tied note, the orchestra harmony change. So then you have to adjust in your bow a different color to demonstrate your acknowledgement of the event, if you like. And these kind of exercise works very well. I think, and recognize, left hand, there is the speed aspect, and there's also a torque aspect. I mean, I always use the analogy of like a car. You could have like a 1.5 or 2 liter sports car that drives very fast. This kind of stuff you have to do, of course. But you could also train yourself to have like a truck who could load a lot of cargo on and going uphill. So things like double stop, very slow double. This is actually bring the torque into your fingers. So one is a strength, one is speed. Both you need.
Thank you.